Kate Morrison felt tired as she stepped off the transport shuttle at New Geneva Station. The journey from the outer rim had taken 3 days, and her body ached from sleeping in the cramped passenger seats. She adjusted the strap of her canvas bag on her shoulder and looked around the busy station. Hundreds of beings from different planets moved through the main area. Some had scales, others had fur, and many looked completely different from anything she had seen before the war started. She wore simple clothes that any civilian might wear, a plain blue shirt, dark pants, and comfortable walking shoes. Nothing about her appearance would tell anyone that she was a military officer. That was exactly how she wanted it. After 3 years serving on the deep space vessel Constellation, she had learned to value quiet moments when nobody knew who she was or what she had done. The station was huge. The ceiling stretched high above her head with metal beams crossing in complex patterns. Large windows showed the dark space outside with distant stars twinkling like tiny lights. Ships of all sizes moved past the windows as they came and went from the station. Some were sleek passenger vessels while others were bulky cargo. Haulers loaded with goods from across the galaxy. Kate had been here before, but it still amazed her how many different species worked and lived together. Before the war, humans had been newcomers to this galactic community. Most other species had been traveling between stars for thousands of years, while humans had only learned how to build faster-than-light ships a few decades ago. The older species often treated humans like children who did not understand the complex politics and traditions of space. The war had changed everything. When the destroyer fleet had appeared from unknown space and started attacking colonies and trade routes, the older species had been caught off guard. Their ancient tactics and careful diplomacy meant nothing against an enemy that wanted only to destroy and consume. Humanity had been forced to learn how to fight in space very quickly. Kate walked through the main concourse toward the civilian transport area. She needed to catch a shuttle to Earth where her family was waiting. It had been 8 months since she had seen her parents and younger brother. The last time she had been home, the war was still raging and nobody knew if humanity would survive. Now the war was over and she could finally take some leave time. The sounds of the station filled her ears. Dozens of languages mixed together as beings talked to each other. Translation devices helped, but many conversations still sounded like musical notes or clicking sounds to human ears. Merchants called out about their goods while passengers hurried to catch their transports. Children of various species ran around while their parents tried to keep them close. She passed a food court where the smells of cooking from 20 different worlds mixed together. Some smells reminded her of Earth food while others made her stomach turn. During her time on the Constellation, she had learned to eat many different things, but she still preferred simple human meals when she could get them. Near the transport gates, Kate noticed the security checkpoints. Every station had them now since the war. Even though the destroyer fleet had been defeated, everyone remained careful about who moved through space. The guards at this station were mostly Zenthari, a reptilian species known for being thorough and sometimes difficult to deal with. The Zenthari had stayed neutral during the war. While other species fought and died against the destroyers, the Zenthari had closed their borders and waited to see who would win. Many people from other species still felt angry about this choice. The Zenthari claimed they were being practical, but others called them cowards. Kate could see that the Zenthari guards were paying special attention to human passengers. They searched bags more carefully and asked more questions when humans passed through their checkpoints. She had heard stories from other officers about similar treatment at different stations. Some species still felt uncomfortable with how quickly humans had become important in galactic affairs. She joined the line for security screening. In front of her, a Kelleran family with crystalline features waited patiently while guards checked their identification. Behind her, an elderly human couple talked quietly about visiting their grandchildren on Europa Station. The line moved slowly as each passenger went through the careful inspection process. Kate thought about the uniform folded neatly at the bottom of her bag. She always carried it when traveling, even when wearing civilian clothes. Military regulations required officers to have their dress uniform available in case of emergency duties. The dark blue fabric with gold insignia represented 3 years of her life spent fighting in the deepest parts of space. The uniform also carried memories she preferred not to think about while surrounded by civilians. Battles where good people had died. Decisions that saved some lives but cost others. Victory celebrations that felt hollow because of friends who were not there to share them. The uniform was both her greatest pride and her heaviest burden. As she moved closer to the checkpoint, Kate watched the Zenthari guards work. They were professional but cold. Their scaled hands moved efficiently through passenger belongings while their yellow eyes missed nothing. She could tell they took some satisfaction in making humans wait longer than other species. The lead guard was older, with dark green scales and multiple service decorations on his uniform. His partner appeared younger, with brighter scales and nervous movements. Both carried the standard security equipment, but Kate noticed they wore it differently than human guards would. The Zenthari preferred to show their authority through formal procedure rather than casual confidence. Kate reached into her pocket and checked that her identification was ready. As a military officer traveling on leave, she had the proper documentation to move freely through any station in this sector. However, she knew that legal authority and practical treatment were often different things. Some guards enjoyed making things difficult for humans regardless of their official rights. The line continued to move forward. Kate watched other passengers complete their screening and continued toward the transport gates. Most went through quickly, but she noticed that humans took longer than others. The guards asked more questions and searched more thoroughly. Some passengers showed frustration, but nobody complained out loud. Soon it would be her turn to face the checkpoint. Kate adjusted her bag strap again and prepared for what might be an unpleasant experience. She hoped the guards would be professional and let her pass without trouble. All she wanted was to get home to her family and rest for a few weeks before returning to duty. The war was over, but peace was still fragile. Every interaction between humans and other species mattered for building trust and cooperation. Kate knew that how she handled the next few minutes might be small, but it was still important. She took a deep breath and stepped forward when the guard called for the next passenger. The older Zenthari guard looked up from his inspection table as Kate approached. His yellow eyes studied her face for a moment before moving down to examine her clothes and bag. She could see him taking note of everything about her appearance. The way she walked, how she carried herself, even the small details of her clothing choices. "Papers," he said in the common galactic language. His voice carried the typical Zenthari accent that made every word sound slightly harsh. Kate handed over her identification without speaking. The guard took the documents and inserted them into his scanner while keeping his eyes on her face. The scanner beeped several times as it processed her information. Kate knew what it would show. Lieutenant Commander Kate Morrison, human female, age 28, born on Earth, currently assigned to the 3rd Deep Strike Fleet. 3 years of active service with commendations for bravery and tactical excellence. Clean record with no violations or incidents. Purpose of travel, the guard asked without looking up from his screen. "Visiting family on Earth," Kate replied. She kept her voice calm and polite. Getting into arguments with station security never helped anyone and often made things worse. The younger Zenthari guard moved around the table to stand beside his partner. Kate noticed that his scales were a brighter shade of green, and he moved with less confidence than the older guard. Probably new to this job and trying to learn by watching. "How long since your last visit to Earth?" the older guard continued. 8 months, Kate answered. "What is your occupation?" Kate paused for a moment. The scanner would already show her military service, but she knew that answering honestly might create complications. However, lying to station security was illegal and would cause much bigger problems if discovered. "I serve in the human military," she said simply. Both guards looked up at this answer. Kate could see interest spark in their eyes. During the war, many beings had strong opinions about human military forces. Some respected what humans had accomplished, while others feared the rapid growth of human power in the galaxy. "Which unit?" the younger guard asked. Kate noticed that other passengers in line were starting to pay attention to the conversation. Word that she was military was spreading through the nearby crowd. 3rd Deep Strike Fleet, Kate replied. She saw recognition in the older guard's eyes. Anyone who followed military news would know about the 3rd Fleet and what they had done during the war. "Place your bag on the table," the older guard ordered. His tone had become more formal and suspicious. Kate lifted her canvas bag and set it down gently. The guard immediately began pulling items out and placing them on the inspection surface. He worked slowly and deliberately, making sure that everyone nearby could see what he was doing. Each item was held up and examined before being placed on the table. Her toiletries, spare clothes, personal datapad, and small personal items were spread out for public viewing. Kate felt her face getting warm as more passengers stopped to watch the inspection. She knew this was meant to embarrass her and make her feel powerless. Some species enjoyed reminding humans that they were still newcomers in galactic society, despite their recent military successes. The younger guard picked up her datapad and activated it. "Password," he demanded. Kate provided the access code for the civilian partition of her device. Military officers carried separate encrypted devices for classified information, but personal datapads often contained private messages and photos that she preferred to keep private. The guard scrolled through her messages and photo gallery while other passengers watched. Kate saw families with children looking on curiously while adult beings from various species whispered among themselves about what was happening. "Many photos of military ships," the younger guard observed loudly. "Why do you have these images?" "I serve on those ships," Kate explained patiently. "The photos are personal memories of my service." The older guard continued searching through her bag with increasing thoroughness. He opened every pocket and felt along the seams for hidden compartments. Kate knew he would not find anything suspicious, but the process was meant to be humiliating, rather than productive. A small crowd had gathered around the checkpoint now. Kate could hear conversations in multiple languages as beings discussed what they were witnessing. Some seemed curious about seeing a human military officer, while others appeared to enjoy watching her being subjected to intense scrutiny. "What is this?" the older guard asked as his hand found something at the bottom of her bag. Kate's heart sank as she realized what he had discovered. "My dress uniform," she answered quietly. The guard's clawed fingers gripped the folded fabric and began to pull it out of the bag. Kate watched as the dark blue material slowly emerged from her belongings. The uniform was folded according to military regulations with precise creases and careful attention to detail. As more of the uniform became visible, Kate could see beings in the crowd leaning forward to get a better view. The rich blue color and quality of the fabric made it clear that this was not ordinary clothing. Military uniforms from any species were usually recognizable by their construction and formal appearance. The older guard held the uniform up higher so everyone could see it clearly. The golden insignia caught the station's artificial lighting and sparkled as he moved the fabric. Kate felt exposed and vulnerable as her most private possessions were displayed for public examination. "Why do you carry this?" the guard asked. His voice had become louder and more aggressive. Kate realized that he was performing for the crowd as much as conducting a security inspection. Military regulations require officers to have dress uniforms available for emergency duties, Kate explained. She could feel dozens of eyes watching her as she spoke. The younger guard took the uniform from his partner and began unfolding it further. Kate wanted to ask him to be careful with the fabric, but knew that any protest would be seen as suspicious behavior. As the uniform opened up, more details became visible to the watching crowd. The rank insignia on the shoulders, the unit patches on the sleeves, and the various service ribbons and medals attached to the chest. Each decoration told a story of battles fought and missions completed during the long war against the destroyer fleets. Kate heard someone in the crowd gasp as they recognized specific medals or unit markings. Not everyone would understand military decorations, but those who did were beginning to realize that they were looking at the uniform of a combat veteran who had seen serious action. The guards continued their inspection, but Kate noticed that their movements had become more careful. Even beings who disliked humans generally respected military service and the sacrifices it required. The uniform was changing how everyone viewed what was happening at the checkpoint. "These medals," the younger guard said as he pointed to the ribbons on the uniform. "What are they for?" Kate looked at the decorations that represented the most difficult period of her life. Each one marked battles where people had died and decisions that would stay with her forever. She did not enjoy talking about her service record with strangers, but the guards were clearly not going to let her pass without answers. "Combat service during the Destroyer War," she said simply. "Various battles and campaigns over 3 years." The crowd around the checkpoint had grown larger and quieter. Kate could feel the weight of their attention as beings from across the galaxy studied her uniform and tried to understand what they were seeing. The war had touched every species in different ways, and human military forces had become both famous and controversial because of their role in the fighting. The older Zenthari guard turned the uniform around in his clawed hands, studying the patches and insignia more closely. His yellow eyes widened as he read the text on the name tape that ran across the chest. Morrison was clearly visible in bold letters, confirming that this uniform belonged to the woman standing before him. Below the name tape, other details became visible as the guard continued his examination. The unit patch of the 3rd Deep Strike Fleet was embroidered in silver thread against the dark blue fabric. Most beings in the galaxy had heard of this unit during the war. They were known for taking on the most dangerous missions and fighting in battles that other forces could not handle. 3rd Deep Strike Fleet, the younger guard read aloud. His voice carried across the checkpoint area, and Kate heard murmurs from the crowd as the information spread. Several beings moved closer to get a better look at the uniform and the woman who wore it. Kate stood quietly while the guards continued their inspection. She could feel the mood around the checkpoint changing, as more people realized what they were witnessing. A few months ago, seeing a human military uniform might have caused fear or suspicion. Now it seemed to create curiosity, and something that might have been respect. The older guard found the campaign ribbons attached to the uniform and began reading them carefully. Each ribbon represented a different battle or operation during the war. Some were for specific planets that had been defended, while others marked major fleet actions against destroyer forces. The collection of ribbons told the story of someone who had been in combat repeatedly over several years. Kepler Prime, the guard said as he identified one of the ribbons. Kate saw several beings in the crowd react to hearing that name. The battle for Kepler Prime had been one of the most important engagements of the entire war. Every species in the galaxy knew what had happened there and why it mattered. Kate remembered that battle with perfect clarity, even though she preferred not to think about it. The destroyer fleet had been heading toward 3 inhabited systems with millions of civilians. The only way to stop them was to make a stand at Kepler Prime, a small mining planet with no strategic value except its location. The human fleet had been outnumbered 3-1. Every tactical analysis said they should retreat and try to defend the populated worlds instead. But Admiral Brooks had made a different choice. The 3rd Deep Strike Fleet and 2 other human units had positioned themselves around Kepler Prime and prepared to fight a battle they could not win. "You were at Kepler Prime," the older guard said. It was not a question. The ribbon on her uniform made her presence at that battle a matter of official record. "Yes," Kate replied simply. The crowd around the checkpoint had grown much larger now. Word was spreading through the station that something important was happening at the security area. Kate could see beings of many different species pressing forward to see what was going on. An elderly Vorthon with 4 arms and gray skin pushed through the crowd until he reached the front. His large eyes focused on Kate's uniform and then moved to her face. She could see strong emotions in his expression as he stared at her. "Young human," the Vorthon said in heavily accented common language. "You were truly at Kepler Prime." Kate nodded to the elderly being. She could see that he was struggling with powerful feelings about something related to that battle. "My family," the Vorthon continued with difficulty. "My son and his children were on civilian transport ships near that system. The destroyer fleet would have reached them if you had not stopped the attack." Kate felt her throat tighten as she listened to the Vorthon speak. During the battle, she had been focused on tactical problems and survival. There had been no time to think about the civilian ships and colonies that depended on their success. Only later did she learn how many lives had been saved by their sacrifice at Kepler Prime. "We did what needed to be done," Kate said quietly. "Many good people died in that battle." "Yes," the Vorthon agreed. "But many more lived because of what you did. 40,000 Vorthon civilians on those transport ships. Children and families who are alive today because human ships held the line when retreat would have been easier." Other voices from the crowd began to speak up as more beings connected Kate's uniform to their own memories of the war. A crystalline Kelleran moved forward and looked at the unit patches on the uniform. 3rd Deep Strike Fleet was also at Kelleran 7, the being said in a voice that sounded like musical chimes. "My people's mining colonies were evacuated because your ships broke the destroyer siege around our system." Kate remembered Kelleran 7 as well. It had been a difficult battle fought in an asteroid field while civilian ships tried to escape from mining stations. The 3rd Fleet had used the asteroids for cover, while holding off a much larger enemy force. The battle had lasted 18 hours and cost them 2 destroyers and hundreds of crew members. A young Terexian with blue fur and large ears spoke from further back in the crowd. Human engineers shared shield technology with our defense fleet after the battle at Terex Station. They asked for nothing in return. Many of our ships survived later battles because of that help. Kate had not known about the technology sharing, but it sounded like something her people would do. Human military doctrine emphasized helping Allied forces even when there was no immediate benefit. The war had taught everyone that cooperation was the only way to survive against an enemy like the destroyer fleets, the Xanthari. Guards found themselves surrounded by beings whose lives had been affected by human actions during the war. What had started as a routine security inspection was becoming something very different. The guards looked uncomfortable as the crowd grew larger and more emotional. The older guard carefully refolded Kate's uniform with more respect than he had shown before. Kate could see that his attitude toward her had changed as he listened to the stories from other beings. The uniform was no longer just a piece of clothing to be searched. It had become a symbol of actions that had affected millions of lives across the galaxy. "You have proper documentation," the guard said formally, as he handed the uniform back to Kate. "Your belongings appear to be in order." Kate accepted her uniform and began packing her bag while the crowd continued to grow around the checkpoint. She could hear conversations in multiple languages as beings shared their own stories about the war and human involvement in the fighting. The younger Xanthari guard moved closer to his partner and spoke quietly. Kate could not hear what he was saying, but she could see uncertainty in his movements. The situation had developed beyond anything either guard had expected when they started their routine inspection. Station security officers were beginning to appear at the edges of the crowd. Kate could see them watching carefully but not intervening. The gathering was peaceful but large enough to create concerns about crowd control and station safety. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, the older guard said, using her proper rank for the first time, "We apologize for any inconvenience during the security screening." Kate looked at the Xanthari guard who had been treating her with suspicion and contempt just minutes earlier. His formal apology was probably genuine, but she could see that it came from political necessity rather than personal feeling. The presence of so many grateful beings had changed the situation in ways that made continued harassment impossible. "You were doing your job," Kate replied diplomatically. "No apology is necessary." But even as she spoke, Kate could see that something important had happened at this checkpoint. The crowd was not just curious anymore. They were beginning to understand something about the war and the role that humans had played in it that many had not fully grasped before. The news of what was happening at the checkpoint spread through New Geneva Station like ripples in a pond. Beings who had been going about their normal business began changing direction to see what was causing such a large gathering. The main concourse started to fill with curious onlookers from dozens of different species. Kate finished packing her belongings while more voices from the crowd shared their stories. Each account added another piece to a picture that many beings had never fully understood before. The war had been fought across so many systems and involved so many different battles that most civilians had only heard fragments of what actually happened. A tall Nexarian with blue skin and silver markings pushed through the crowd until he reached the front. The geometric patterns on his face identified him as someone of high rank in Nexarian society. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone used to being heard. "I am Commander Vex of the Nexarian Defense Fleet," he announced. "I was present at the Battle of Sigma Draconis when the 3rd Deep Strike Fleet provided support for our evacuation operations." Kate remembered that battle clearly. The Nexarian Home Fleet had been protecting civilian transports when a destroyer squadron attacked without warning. The human ships had arrived just as the Nexarian defenses were failing. It had been a close fight with heavy losses on both sides. "Your Admiral Brooks coordinated the rescue of our transport ships even while his own forces were taking heavy fire," Commander Vex continued. 300,000 Nexarian civilians escaped because human ships held the enemy long enough for the evacuation to complete. The Xanthari guard stood silently as more and more beings came forward with similar stories. What had begun as a security inspection was turning into something like a memorial service for events that had shaped the entire galaxy. Kate felt overwhelmed by the attention and the memories that each story brought back. An Altarian merchant with golden fur and mechanical implants stepped forward from the crowd. Human cargo ships shared food and medical supplies with Altarian refugee camps after the attack on our border colonies. They asked for no payment and left before our government could offer proper thanks. Kate had heard about similar actions by human civilian vessels during the war. When military ships were busy fighting, civilian crews had often taken it upon themselves to help refugees and disaster victims. It was not official policy, but it reflected something important about human culture that other species were beginning to understand. The crowd continued to grow as more beings arrived to see what was happening. Kate could see station security officers positioned around the edges of the gathering, but they made no move to disperse the crowd. The stories being shared were peaceful, and the gathering remained orderly despite its size. A young human couple pushed through the crowd and approached Kate directly. The woman looked nervous but determined while the man carried a small child who appeared to be about 3 years old. "Lieutenant Commander," the woman said quietly, "my husband served on the destroyer Hampton during the war. He was killed at the Battle of Ross 128. Kate felt her heart sink as she heard those words. She knew many families had lost people during the war, but meeting them face to face always brought back painful memories. The Battle of Ross 128 had been particularly costly for human forces. "I'm sorry for your loss," Kate said sincerely. "Your husband died defending innocent people. His sacrifice mattered." "I know," the woman replied with tears in her eyes. "I wanted to say thank you, not just for what you did during the war, but for representing all of us with dignity, even when people treat you badly." Kate looked at the small child in the man's arms and felt the weight of responsibility that every military officer carried. This child would grow up without a father because of decisions made during the war. The victories and defeats that defined Kate's military record had real consequences for real families. The elderly Vorthan who had spoken earlier approached Kate again with several other Vorthan beings following behind him. "Lieutenant Commander, may I introduce my son and his children, the ones who were saved when your fleet held the line at Kepler Prime." Kate found herself facing a family of 4 Vorthans, including 2 young children who stared at her with large, curious eyes. The adult Vorthans bowed formally in the manner of their species while the children watched with fascination. "We have traveled here specifically to attend a memorial service for those lost in the war," the son explained. "Finding you here today feels like more than coincidence. It feels like the universe giving us a chance to say thank you properly." Kate felt deeply moved by the formal gratitude of the Vorthan family. During the war, she had focused on completing missions and keeping her crew alive. There had been little time to think about the civilian lives that depended on their success. Meeting people who had been saved by those actions made the cost of the war feel more meaningful. More beings continued to approach with their own stories and expressions of gratitude. Kate began to understand that her uniform had triggered something that went far beyond a simple security inspection. These beings had been carrying feelings about the war that they had never been able to express directly to the people involved. A group of Kelleran traders gathered around Commander Vex and began discussing tactical details of various battles. Kate could hear them comparing different accounts of the same events and filling in details that each species had experienced differently. The war was being remembered and understood in new ways as people shared information. The younger Zenthari guard moved closer to Kate and spoke quietly so that others could not hear. "Lieutenant Commander, I must ask you something. My people remained neutral during the war. We thought it was the smart choice. Were we wrong?" Kate looked at the young guard who was probably not much older than herself. She could see genuine confusion and regret in his expression. The Zenthari decision to remain neutral had been criticized by many species, but it was not her place to judge the choices that governments had made. Every species did what they thought was best for their people. Kate replied diplomatically, "The war's over now. What matters is what we do going forward." "But so many died," the young guard continued, "and my people did nothing to help. How can we face the families of those who lost loved ones while we stayed safe behind our borders?" Kate thought carefully before answering. The question of Zenthari neutrality was politically sensitive, and her words might be repeated throughout the station. She needed to be honest but also diplomatic. "The war taught all of us hard lessons about sacrifice and responsibility," she said. "Some learned those lessons through fighting and others learned by watching. The important thing is that we all learned." The older Zenthari guard had been listening to this conversation and stepped closer to his younger partner. The lieutenant commander is right. We made our choice and we must live with the consequences, but we can still choose how to act in the future. Kate could see that both guards were struggling with questions that many beings across the galaxy were asking themselves. The war had ended, but the process of understanding what it meant was still continuing. Every species was trying to figure out their place in the new reality that had emerged from the conflict station announcement systems activated with a message about crowd control and requests for beings to return to normal activities. Kate realized that the gathering around the checkpoint had become large enough to disrupt station operations. She needed to continue to her transport before the situation became a bigger problem. "I should go," Kate said to the crowd. "My transport will be leaving soon." But as she started to move toward the departure gates, many beings in the crowd followed her. What had begun as a chance encounter was becoming something like a procession through the station. Kate felt both honored and uncomfortable with the attention, as dozens of beings accompanied her toward the civilian transport area. As Kate walked through the station toward her departure gate, the crowd following her continued to grow. Word of the encounter at the security checkpoint was spreading through communication networks and social media channels across the station. Beings who had not witnessed the original event were arriving to see what was happening. The group walking with Kate had become diverse beyond anything she had ever experienced. Vortans with their forearms walked beside crystalline Kellerans, whose bodies reflected the station lights. Nexarians with their geometric facial markings talked quietly with furry Altarians, while Terexians with their large ears listened carefully to every conversation. Kate noticed that other humans in the station were beginning to approach the group. Some wore civilian clothes, while others displayed military insignia from different branches of human service. A few carried bags that suggested they were also traveling on leave, while others appeared to be stationed permanently at New Geneva. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison," called a voice from behind her. Kate turned to see a middle-aged human woman in the uniform of the human merchant marine. "Captain Lisa Rodriguez, cargo vessel Atlantic Star. I wanted to thank you for what the Third Fleet did at Kepler Prime." Kate was surprised to meet a merchant marine officer at the station. During the war, civilian cargo ships had often been targets for destroyer raids. The merchant marine had suffered heavy losses while trying to keep supply lines open and evacuate civilians from threatened systems. "We were all serving in our own way," Kate replied. "Your people took risks every day to keep the war effort supplied." "Yes, but you military folks did the actual fighting," Captain Rodriguez said. "We just tried to stay alive long enough to deliver our cargo." Other human military personnel began introducing themselves as they joined the group. Kate met a Navy engineer who had worked on shield modifications, an Army logistics officer who had coordinated supply operations, and a Marine sergeant who had participated in ground combat on several contested worlds. Each introduction led to more stories about battles and operations during the war. Kate began to realize how much she had not known about the broader conflict even while serving in one of the most active units. The war had been so large and complex that no single person could understand all of it. A young Kelleran approached the group and addressed Kate directly. "Lieutenant Commander, my name is Resonance of Crystal Song. I am a journalist who covers military affairs for the Kelleran news networks. May I ask you some questions about your experiences during the war?" Kate felt uncomfortable with the idea of being interviewed while surrounded by such a large crowd. Military officers were generally trained to refer media questions to public relations specialists, rather than speaking directly to reporters. "I would prefer not to do interviews while on personal leave," Kate replied politely. "You might contact the Third Fleet Public Affairs Office if you need official statements." "I understand," the journalist said. "But this gathering is newsworthy in itself. The reaction of so many beings to meeting a human war veteran suggests important changes in how the galaxy views humanity." Kate realized that the journalist was right about the significance of what was happening. The spontaneous gathering of grateful beings from multiple species was probably unusual enough to be worthy of news coverage. However, she still felt uncomfortable with the attention. Commander Vex of the Nexarian Defense Fleet moved closer to Kate and spoke quietly. "Lieutenant Commander, I have been observing this gathering with great interest. In my opinion, this represents something important that goes beyond individual gratitude." "What do you mean?" Kate asked. Before the war, most species viewed humans as aggressive newcomers who did not understand galactic civilization. Commander Vex explained. The speed of human technological development and military expansion made many beings nervous about human intentions. Kate nodded in understanding. She had heard similar concerns from other species during diplomatic meetings and joint operations. Human rapid advancement had indeed created suspicion among older galactic civilizations. But today, Commander Vex continued, these beings are not responding to human military power. They are responding to human character. The stories they are sharing are about sacrifice, protection of civilians, and help given without expectation of reward. Kate thought about the commander's observation as she continued walking toward her departure gate. The crowd was indeed sharing stories that emphasized human actions that went beyond simple military effectiveness. The focus was on moral choices and principles rather than technological superiority or tactical success. An announcement echoed through the station as the crowd reached the civilian transport area. Attention passengers on Transport 749 to Earth. Boarding will begin in 15 minutes at Gate 12. Kate realized that her transport was being called. She would need to leave the crowd soon and continue her journey home. But the beings following her showed no signs of dispersing. If anything, the group seemed to be growing larger as more inhabitants of the station arrived to see what was happening. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings, Kate said loudly enough for most of the crowd to hear. I appreciate your kind words and stories, but I need to board my transport soon. I don't want to miss my journey home. Wait, called the elderly Vorthon who had first spoken to her at the security checkpoint. Before you leave, may we make a request? Kate stopped walking and turned to face the Vorthon elder. The crowd gathered around them in a rough circle while other station passengers watched with curiosity. During the war, many beings lost family and friends in the fighting, the Vorthon said. We have held memorial services and honored our own dead, but we have never had the opportunity to properly thank those from other species who sacrificed for our protection. Kate felt a chill as she realized what the Vorthon might be requesting. Public speaking was not something she enjoyed, and she definitely did not want to become the center of a major ceremony in the middle of a busy space station. With respect, honored elder, I am just one officer among many who served during the war, Kate said carefully. I do not speak for all human military forces or for those who died in service. We understand, the Vorthon replied. But today you have become a symbol of something important. Your presence here and the stories that have been shared represent a moment of understanding between our species. Other voices from the crowd began to express support for the Vorthon's request. Kate could see that many beings wanted some kind of formal recognition of what had been shared at the checkpoint and during the walk through the station. The Kelleran journalist moved closer with recording equipment while station security officers watched nervously from the edges of the crowd. Kate realized that whatever happened next would likely be broadcast across multiple star systems and remembered for years to come. I don't know what to say that would be worthy of such an occasion, Kate said honestly. I'm not a politician or a diplomat. I'm just a naval officer who wants to go home and see her family. Perhaps that is exactly why your words would be meaningful, suggested Commander. Facts, politicians and diplomats speak from preparation and calculation. You would speak from experience and heart. Kate looked around at the faces surrounding her and saw hope and expectation in their expressions. These beings had carried feelings about the war that they needed to express, and somehow, she had become the focus for those emotions. Refusing their request might be seen as rejecting their gratitude and their need for closure. The transport boarding announcement was repeated while Kate considered what to do. Her personal preference was to avoid the spotlight and continue quietly to her destination. But her military training emphasized duty and service to others even when it involved personal sacrifice. If it would truly help these beings find peace about the war, Kate said finally, then I will try to say something appropriate. But I want everyone to understand that I speak only for myself, and not for any government or military organization. Kate stood in the center of the crowd as beings from across the galaxy gathered closer to hear what she might say. The noise level in the station had dropped significantly as conversation stopped and attention focused on the small human woman in civilian clothes, who had unexpectedly become the center of such an important moment. Station security officers had positioned themselves around the gathering but made no move to disperse the crowd. Kate could see that they were communicating with station command through their communication devices. probably receiving instructions about how to handle the unusual situation. The elderly Vorthon, who had first recognized her uniform, stepped forward and raised his forearms in a gesture of formal respect. "Honored Lieutenant Commander Morrison, we ask you to speak not as a representative of any government but as someone who lived through the war and understands its cost." Kate took a deep breath and tried to organize her thoughts. Public speaking had never been her strength, and she felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of addressing such a diverse group of beings about such an important topic. But she could see in their faces that this moment mattered to them in ways that went beyond simple curiosity. "I need to be honest with all of you," Kate began in a voice loud enough to carry across the crowd. "When I put on my uniform each day during the war, I wasn't thinking about galactic politics or the future of interspecies relations. I was thinking about the people serving beside me and the mission we had been given." The crowd remained completely silent as Kate spoke. Even the background noise of the station seemed muted as being strained to hear every word. "The battles you have mentioned today were frightening and difficult experiences," Kate continued. "At Kepler Prime, we knew the odds were against us. Every tactical analysis said we should retreat and try to defend elsewhere. But Admiral Brooks made a different choice." Kate paused as memories of that battle flooded back. The long hours of combat, the reports of ships being destroyed, the knowledge that retreat might mean the death of millions of civilians in the surrounding systems. Admiral Brooks told us that sometimes you have to make a stand not because you can win but because some things are worth defending even if the cost is everything you have, Kate said. "We stayed at Kepler Prime because innocent people would die if we left." A young Terexian in the crowd called out a question. "Were you afraid during those battles?" Kate smiled slightly at the directness of the question. "I was terrified during most of the war. Fear is a normal response to combat, but fear doesn't have to control your choices. We were afraid, but we did our jobs anyway." Commander Vex stepped forward from the crowd. "Lieutenant Commander, many species are still trying to understand how humans were able to accomplish what they did during the war. Your technology was not superior to ours, and your numbers were smaller than most established military forces." Kate thought carefully about how to answer this question. Different species had different military traditions and cultural approaches to warfare. What worked for humans might not work for others. "I think the difference was in how we made decisions," Kate said. "Many species have military traditions that emphasize careful planning and avoiding unnecessary risks. These are good approaches for most situations. But the destroyer war required different thinking." She could see that beings in the crowd were listening intently to her explanation. Understanding human military success had become important for many species as they planned their own future defense strategies. Human military doctrine teaches officers to accept calculated risks in order to protect others, Kate continued. "We were willing to fight battles that we might lose if the alternative was allowing innocent people to be harmed. This sometimes meant taking actions that other species would consider too dangerous." An Altarian merchant who had spoken earlier raised a clawed hand. "But surely you must have felt anger towards species like the Zenthari, who remained neutral while you fought and died." Kate glanced toward the two Zenthari guards who were still following the crowd. She could see discomfort in their expressions as the question of their species' neutrality was raised again. This was exactly the kind of political issue that military officers were trained to handle carefully. "Every species made the choices they thought were best for their people," Kate replied diplomatically. "It's not my place to judge those decisions. The war is over and we need to focus on building a better future together." But the Altarian persisted with his question. "Even now you show more generosity toward those who abandoned you than most species would. Why do humans continue to help others even when there is no benefit to yourselves?" Kate realized that this question went to the heart of what many beings were trying to understand about human culture. The stories that had been shared at the checkpoint were all examples of humans helping others without expectation of reward or strategic advantage. "I think it comes from how we see ourselves in relation to others," Kate said after considering her words carefully. "Human culture teaches that we are responsible for protecting those who cannot protect themselves. This responsibility doesn't depend on whether others can help us in return." The Kelleran journalist who had been recording the conversation stepped closer. "Lieutenant Commander, do you believe that this sense of responsibility influenced human actions during the war?" "Yes," Kate replied without hesitation. When we saw civilian ships being attacked or colonies being destroyed, we couldn't just calculate the strategic value of intervention. We saw people who needed help and we tried to provide it. The elderly Vorthan spoke again with deep emotion in his voice. This is why our gratitude runs so deep. You did not save our transport ships because we could offer you something valuable in return. You saved them because it was the right thing to do. Kate felt her throat tighten as she listened to the Vorthan's words. The war had cost so much in lives and resources that she sometimes wondered if the victories had been worth the price. But meeting the families who had been saved made the sacrifices feel meaningful in ways that military reports could never convey. The people who died during the war believed that some things are worth any cost, Kate said quietly. Freedom, protection of innocence, the right of all species to live without fear. They gave their lives for those principles. The crowd had grown even larger during Kate's impromptu speech. Beings from throughout the station had gathered to listen, and Kate could see that many were emotionally affected by what they were hearing. Some species expressed emotion differently than humans, but she could recognize signs of deep feeling across the diverse gathering. A final boarding call for her transport echoed through the station area. Kate realized that she would need to leave very soon or miss her journey home. But the crowd showed no signs of dispersing, and she felt reluctant to end such an important conversation abruptly. I need to board my transport now, Kate announced. Thank you all for sharing your stories and for this opportunity to speak with you. But as she started to move toward the departure gate, the crowd began to follow her again. Kate realized that the gathering was not ready to end simply because she needed to travel. Something important had started here that would continue even after she left the station. As Kate approached the departure gate with the crowd following behind her, she noticed that station personnel had gathered to watch the unusual procession. Transport crew members, maintenance workers, and administrative staff lined the corridors to see what was causing such a large gathering of beings from different species. The departure gate area was normally a busy but routine place where passengers said quick goodbyes and boarded their transports. Today it felt more like a ceremonial space where something historically significant was taking place. Kate could see that the transport crew was waiting patiently for her arrival despite the delay caused by the gathering. A tall human man in the uniform of a transport captain approached Kate as she reached the gate area. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, I am Captain Paul Anderson of Transport 749. We heard about what happened at the security checkpoint. It would be an honor to have you aboard our vessel. Kate was surprised by the captain's formal recognition. Civilian transport crews normally treated military passengers the same as any other travelers. The extra attention made her feel self-conscious, but she appreciated the professional courtesy. Thank you, Captain Anderson, Kate replied. I apologize for any delay I may have caused in your departure schedule. No apology necessary, the captain said. What happened here today is more important than keeping to a precise timetable. The crowd had formed a large semicircle around the departure gate while Kate prepared to board her transport. Many beings were still arriving as word continued to spread through the station communication networks. Kate could see that some people were recording the event, while others were calling friends and family to share what they were witnessing. Commander Vex of the Nexarian Defense Fleet stepped forward from the crowd. Lieutenant Commander, before you depart, I would like to make a formal statement on behalf of the Nexarian people. Kate felt nervous about what kind of formal statement might be made in such a public setting. Diplomatic statements between species could have important political implications that went far beyond the intentions of the people making them. Commander Vex, I appreciate your desire to make a statement, but I should remind you that I am not here in any official capacity, Kate said carefully. I cannot accept formal diplomatic communications on behalf of my government. I understand, Commander Vex replied. This statement is not directed to your government, but to you personally as a representative of the human military personnel who served during the war. Commander Vex moved to a position where his voice could carry across the entire crowd. Kate realized that whatever he said would be recorded and probably broadcast across multiple star systems within hours of her departure. On behalf of the Nexarian Defense Fleet and the Nexarian people, I want to formally acknowledge the debt we owe to human military forces, Commander Vex announced in a loud, clear voice. At the Battle of Sigma Draconis, human ships sacrificed themselves to protect Nexarian civilian transports. 300,000 of our people are alive today because humans chose to value Nexarian lives as much as their own. The crowd responded with expressions of agreement and support from beings of many different species. Kate could see that Commander Vex's statement was encouraging others to make similar formal acknowledgments of human actions during the war. The elderly Vorthan, who had first recognized her uniform, moved forward with his family, members following behind him. The Vorthan Council of Elders has asked me to convey their formal gratitude to all human military personnel who participated in the defense of our civilian ships at Kepler Prime. Kate felt overwhelmed as more beings began making formal statements of gratitude from their respective governments and organizations. What had started as a chance encounter at a security checkpoint was becoming something like an impromptu diplomatic ceremony. A young Kelleran approached the gate area carrying what appeared to be an official document. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, the Kelleran Trade Federation has prepared a formal resolution of thanks for human actions during the siege of Kelleran. 7. We would be honored if you would accept this document on behalf of all human military personnel. Kate looked at the ornately decorated document with uncertainty. Accepting formal resolutions from foreign governments was definitely beyond her authority as an individual officer on personal leave. But refusing such a gesture might be seen as insulting to the Kelleran people. I am honored by your gesture, but I cannot accept official documents on behalf of my government or military, Kate said diplomatically. Perhaps you could present this resolution through proper diplomatic channels. We understand the limitations of your authority, the Kelleran replied. But we wanted you to see that our gratitude is official and formally recognized by our government. The document will be presented through diplomatic channels, but we wanted to show it to you personally. Kate nodded in appreciation of the Kelleran's thoughtfulness. She could see that beings throughout the crowd were making efforts to ensure that their gratitude was expressed in ways that would have lasting significance beyond this single encounter. Captain Anderson approached Kate again as the final boarding announcement was made. Lieutenant Commander, we really do need to depart soon to maintain our schedule to Earth. But I want you to know that this transport carries several other military personnel who are returning home on leave. They would be honored to meet you during the journey. Kate realized that her hope for anonymous travel had been completely abandoned. Word of her identity and the events at the station had spread throughout the transport crew and passenger list. The journey home would probably involve more conversations about the war and her service record. I understand, Captain, Kate said. I'll try to be available to meet with other service members during the trip. The two Zenthari guards who had conducted the original security inspection pushed through the crowd to reach Kate before she boarded her transport. The older guard carried himself with formal military bearing while his younger partner appeared nervous about approaching her. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, the older guard said formally, I wish to make a personal apology for the manner in which we conducted your security screening. Your service record and the gratitude of so many beings proves that you deserved more respectful treatment. Kate looked at the Zenthari guard who had been suspicious and hostile toward her just hours earlier. She could see genuine regret in his expression and understood that the encounter had affected him as much as it had affected her. You were doing your job according to your training and orders, Kate replied. No personal apology is necessary. The younger guard stepped forward with obvious difficulty. Lieutenant Commander, may I ask you a question that has been troubling me since this gathering began? Kate nodded for him to continue. My species chose neutrality during the war because we believed it was the safest course for our people, the young guard said. But listening to these stories today, I wonder if safety should have been our highest priority. Should we have chosen to help others even if it meant risking ourselves? Kate thought carefully about how to answer such a personal and political question. The young guard was essentially asking her to judge the fundamental choices that his entire species had made during the most important conflict in galactic history. Every species has to make decisions based on their own values and circumstances, Kate said gently. What matters now is not the choices you made in the past, but the choices you make going forward. But how can we face the families of those who died while we remained safe? The young guard persisted. Kate could see deep moral conflict in the young Zenthari's expression. The events of the day had forced him to confront questions about duty, sacrifice, and moral responsibility that his species had avoided during the war. You face them by learning from what happened and by choosing to act differently if similar situations arise in the future, Kate said. The war taught all of us lessons about what really matters. The important thing is that we all learned. The final boarding call echoed through the departure area as Kate prepared to leave the remarkable gathering that had formed around her. She could see that many beings in the crowd were reluctant to let the moment end. But her transport could not wait any longer without disrupting the entire station schedule. Captain Anderson gestured toward the boarding ramp while transport crew members prepared to close the departure gate. "Lieutenant Commander, we need to depart within the next few minutes." Kate turned to address the crowd one final time. "Thank you all for sharing your stories and for this opportunity to speak with you. The war was difficult for everyone, but today has shown me that something good came from all that suffering. We learned to see each other as partners rather than competitors." The elderly Vorthan raised his forearms in a gesture of formal farewell. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison, you have given us something precious today. You have shown us that the sacrifices of the war created bonds between our species that will last for generations." Kate felt tears forming in her eyes as she looked at the faces surrounding her. Just a few hours ago, she had been an anonymous traveler, hoping to reach home without incident. Now she was leaving behind a gathering of beings whose lives had been touched by human actions during the war and who had found a way to express gratitude that had been building for months. "The bonds you speak of were created by the actions of many people from all our species," Kate replied. "Today has reminded me that we all have more in common than we have differences." As Kate moved toward the boarding ramp, the crowd began to applaud in the manner of their respective species. Humans clapped their hands while Vorthons drummed with their forearms. Kellerans created musical chimes and Nexarians hummed in harmonic patterns. The sound was unlike anything Kate had ever heard as dozens of species expressed appreciation in their own cultural traditions. Kate paused at the top of the boarding ramp and turned back to wave goodbye to the crowd. She could see that many beings were recording this moment and knew that images of her departure would be shared across the galaxy within hours. The simple act of a human military officer going home had somehow become a symbol of the new relationships that had emerged from the war. Inside the transport, Kate found that word of the events at the station had spread throughout the passenger compartment. Other travelers looked up as she entered, and several approached her immediately, with questions and expressions of interest in what had happened. Captain Anderson personally escorted Kate to her assigned seat and ensured that she was comfortable before departure. "Lieutenant Commander, I want you to know that carrying you on this transport is an honor for my entire crew." We heard about the gathering and what it represented. Kate settled into her seat as the transport prepared for departure from New Geneva Station. Through the window, she could see that the crowd in the departure area was slowly dispersing, but many beings remained, in small groups talking about what they had witnessed. A young human woman in civilian clothes approached Kate's seat with obvious nervousness. "Excuse me, Lieutenant Commander Morrison. My name is Amy Chen, and I'm a graduate student studying interspecies relations at Luna University. Could I ask you about what happened today?" Kate looked at the young woman and realized that the events at the station would probably be studied and analyzed by scholars for years to come. What had felt like a personal encounter was actually a significant moment in the history of relations between species. "What would you like to know?" Kate asked. "I'm trying to understand why so many beings reacted so strongly to seeing your uniform," Amy explained. "The war ended months ago, but today felt like people were processing it for the first time." Kate thought about the question as the transport began moving away from the station. "I think many beings had feelings about the war that they had not been able to express before. Today gave them a chance to say things that had been building up inside them. But why did they react so strongly to you specifically?" Amy continued. "There are other human military personnel on this station every day." Kate realized that Amy's question went to the heart of what had made today different from routine encounters between humans and other species. "I think it was the combination of circumstances. The security inspection, the uniform being displayed publicly, and the stories that people began sharing. It created a moment when individual experiences connected to larger historical events. As the transport moved into open space, Kate could see New Geneva Station growing smaller in the distance. She knew that what had happened there would continue to have effects long after she reached Earth. The stories shared today would be told and retold across the galaxy, creating new understanding of what the war had meant and what the peace might become. Amy Chen continued her questions about the political and social implications of the gathering, while other passengers listened to the conversation. Kate found herself becoming an informal teacher about military service and interspecies relations for beings who had not experienced the war directly. Several hours into the journey, Captain Anderson approached Kate's seat again. "Lieutenant Commander, we have received communications from several news organizations requesting interviews about the events at New Geneva Station. How would you like us to respond?" Kate felt tired at the thought of more public attention and media coverage. All she wanted was to reach home and spend time with her family after months of military duty. But she understood that her actions and words had become part of something larger than her personal preferences. "Please tell them that I am on personal leave and not available for official interviews," Kate said. "They can contact 3rd Fleet Public Affairs if they need official statements about military matters." "Understood," Captain Anderson replied. "But I should tell you that footage of today's events is already being broadcast across multiple star systems. You may find that media attention continues, even after you reach Earth." Kate looked out the window at the stars that had been the backdrop for 3 years of war, and now formed the setting for an uncertain peace. She thought about the beings she had met at the station and the stories they had shared. Each account had added to her understanding of how the war had affected lives across the galaxy. The war had been fought in space battles and planetary sieges, but its real impact had been on families and communities and individual beings who had lost loved ones or been saved by the actions of others. Today had shown her that the victory against the destroyer fleets was only the beginning of what humanity had accomplished. The real victory was in the relationships that had been built through shared sacrifice and mutual protection. The bonds between species that had been forged in combat were now growing into something that might become lasting friendship and cooperation. The gratitude expressed today was not just for military actions, but for the values that had motivated those actions. Kate closed her eyes and tried to rest as the transport continued toward Earth. She knew that when she arrived home, she would have to explain to her family why news reports were calling her a symbol of human military service. She would have to describe the encounter at the station and the gathering that had formed around her uniform. But for now, she was simply a tired officer going home after a long deployment. The war was over, the peace was beginning, and the galaxy was learning that humanity had earned its place among the stars not through conquest, but through character. The folded uniform in her bag had revealed more than military service. It had revealed the heart of what made humanity worthy of the trust that other species were beginning to place in them. The transport continued through space toward Earth while behind them. The story of what had happened at New Geneva Station spread across the galaxy, carrying a message about sacrifice, courage, and the bonds that can form between very different peoples when they choose to stand together against darkness.